Dr. John Campbell made millions of pounds telling people to get themselves a coronavirus vaccine, and he's now pretending to be on our side. It's gone pretty well for Dr. John Campbell so far. No one's really rumbled him at all, but now he's made his first big mistake. He's agreed to an interview with the Trigonometry boys. Look out, establishment figures, for the Trigonometry boys are on your tail again. Imagine two hard-nosed detectives of truth getting their teeth into a lead. Prepare yourself, Campbell, for the hardest, most charismatic, hilariously funny line of questioning you've ever had in your whole life. You think you can sneak one past the truther movement, do you, Campbell? You think you can sit there working for the establishment and not fall afoul of Francis Foster and Constantine Kazan? Well, bad luck, old bean. Prepare yourself for a couple of real hardballs flying at your face, trigonometry style.
Our brilliant guest today is a doctor and a very successful YouTuber.
Pow!
Not least thanks to COVID and the lockdowns, which he has been covering in great detail. Dr. John Campbell, welcome to Trigonometry.
Welcome, and thank you. I've been looking forward to talking to you guys and looking forward to the conversation.
So genuine right off the bat. Thank you. Yeah, I've been really looking forward to talking to you guys. Really been looking forward to the conversation. Yeah, I mean, you two, some of the most, brilliant minds in the whole of the world. I mean, who wouldn't just be so excited to be on, trigonometry? I mean, it's really just the cutting edge of, conversation.
And as have our audience, they've been clamoring and demanding that we get you on as soon as possible.
This is why I feel like this show is dishonest. Like, half the people that are aware of this guy are convinced that he's controlled opposition, and they're like, hang on a minute, this guy was pushing the vaccines all this time. Now he's turned around and said, oh, hang on, maybe there's something wrong with him after all. He's made all this money doing so. He's got this giant YouTube channel that keeps growing and growing and growing. And they don't even sort of bring it up or reference it. It's just like, wow, man, you're so amazing. You're so incredible. It's so brilliant. Everyone is just so excited to talk to you. Like, this whole issue is just completely ignored. This is supposed to be like, the two guys on the side of truth fighting the establishment, coming in there, and the whole issue is just brushed under the carpet completely.
Before we talk about all the juicy stuff that we want to talk to you about, John, just tell us, who are you? How are you where you are? What has been the journey through life that leads you to be sitting here talking to us? And by the way, we're sort of thinking we're these hip, cool, young-ish YouTubers.
Sorry, who's thinking that? Who was sitting there thinking that?
We're sort of thinking we're these hip, cool, young-ish YouTubers.
Oh, you were thinking that about yourself. Right. Okay. Well, I guess nobody can stop you from doing that.
You're crushing it. You've got nearly 3 million subscribers, mate.
Oh, yeah. The subscribers have picked up over time.
Do you see what I'm saying? Okay. For anyone inside the truth movement, for anyone that wants to get to the truth about what's going on with the vaccines, someone like Dr. John Campbell, who has millions of subscribers on YouTube, his YouTube channel is going from strength to strength. This is a red flag. This is a call for alarm. This is disturbing. This is like an accusation that has to be answered. Not like, hey man, you're absolutely crushing it. Woo, yeah. Like, if someone's doing massive numbers on YouTube, YouTube might as well be called like Establishment Tube or Cabal Tube. Like, one of the main reasons why everyone is so just saying, okay, there's something going on with trigonometry, is because they're just constantly pushed. They're constantly up the algorithm. Their YouTube channel is just growing and growing and growing. And if you're somebody who is out there and you are legitimately saying, hang on, there might be something wrong with these vaccines, you get kicked off of YouTube. You don't get 5 million subscribers and over £1 million in advertising revenue. So this is a reason to be skeptical. But here on Trigonometry, right, it's just sort of massaged into this reason to really give this guy credibility. It's like, oh, you're the anti-vaccine guy on YouTube. It's doing really well. That's so normal. That is so normal. You're asking questions about the vaccine, and your subscribers just keep going up and up and up. Congratulations, man. We thought we were the coolest people on YouTube, but it turns out it's you. Stay tuned for more tough questions.
Basically, I'm a bit of a strange, eccentric guy from Carlisle in the north of England.
That pushed the vaccines. Can we at least mention that? It's like, how did your YouTube channel get such huge numbers? Well, basically, I'm an eccentric guy from the old north of England, and that's what happened. People just tuned in and were like, wow, this guy's got a red shirt on and some headphones. And they were like, wow, you're amazing. And they just started following me. No, it's got nothing to do with the fact that you were pushing the vaccines and you were a major reason why a lot of people got vaccinated. Nothing to do with that. That's not why you started growing a YouTube channel during the pandemic. No, it's because you're an eccentric guy from north of England. It's just one big fairy tale story, good girl gone bad. It's just so beautiful, isn't it? It's like the little engine that could push the vaccines.
But for a long time, I was actually a nurse. So when I was 18, I trained as a psychiatric nurse and then as a general nurse. Did quite a few academic courses after that. And then when I was, I must have been, about 30, 31, I went into full-time nurse education. And I put together what I knew about science, the 10 years experience I had as a clinical nurse, and put that into educating student nurses. And that blossomed out into teaching nurse practitioners and basically anyone who would listen. And I did that for 27 years. And then what actually happened was there was this strange guy called Tony Blair. You're probably too young to remember him.
But sadly not.
Yeah, we do remember Tony.
Users of trigonometry are reminded that was the comedy part of the podcast.
That's a pity. Noted for quite a few notable achievements, which we don't need to go into. But in the 1990s, he decided he wanted 50% of young people in higher education. For some bizarre reason, he tried to make everyone an academic, as if there's something wrong with being a practical nurse or a bricklayer or a plumber. He wanted to go into the academic route.
It's probably got something to do with the fact, John, that everyone who goes into the university system now comes out as a raving far left activist. It could have something to do with that. Just throwing that out there I'm sure you're not going to bring this up, so I will.
So they lifted nurse education, lock, stock and barrel, and plonked us into higher education. So I found myself in a higher education environment. And it was good in some ways. It meant I could become more of an academic. So I did a couple of higher degrees. I did a PhD. And that's why I'm a doctor. This has caused quite a bit of confusion, really, because I talk about healthcare-related material because that's what I do. I've learned biology and research methods in healthcare. I've written books on pathophysiology and physiology and all that kind of stuff. But I actually trained mostly nurses. And then actually, after I retired, I did some work with nurse practitioners, training registered nurses up to be nurse practitioners to diagnose it in their own right. So I'm basically an academic, but I talk, all my expertise is in healthcare related material.
You're not going to believe this, but this is actually quite a long, boring section of trigonometry, I know. But let me just summarize. You get the sell here. I'm just a working class bloke from north of England that's basically a nurse. And then bad old Tony Blair came in there and said, you've got to get out the books and go to university. So I got a bunch of degrees and I'm really clever now. And I'm just sort of the guy next door who's working class, who you sort of trust. But I also have all this incredible medical knowledge that they forced me to get. And now I'm just your friendly local expert on YouTube, eccentric guy telling you to get the old vaccines until it becomes clear that everyone's poisoned. And then I turn around and go, aye, by gum, it looks like I might have accidentally told you to get them there vaccines for no reason other than the £1 million I've got in my bank account from doing it. But I'm still your local friendly neighbourhood by gum northern geezer who's just a working class bloke, and now I'm going to turn around and totally tell you the truth. Without the rubbish accent, that's what it is.
When COVID came along, I was getting about maybe 20, 30,000 views a day. Something like that. I think I got to around about 100,000 subscribers. But then COVID came along and we were talking about COVID. We were talking about the principles and things that were going on. And then the YouTube views kind of accelerated. So now I'm mostly doing video work now. Fascinating talking to people like yourselves, of course. And but I also, for some strange reason, some of the world's leading doctors and academics come on my channel and talk to me about things.
How strange. Now that you're the trusted YouTuber, the trusted blue-collar northern geezer on the old YouTube that you could totally trust, and all the major academics and sort of establishment figures are coming onto your channel, your millions of subscribers, and they're telling people what to think. Wow, now that you're the absolute voice of truth that's on our side, all of these incredibly influential people with big reach and expertise are coming on your channel. It's sort of like the trigonometry story, where, you know, all of a sudden, all these sort of A-list establishment guests, they're just desperate to get on there and talk to, you know, these guys, desperate to have these comms.
And I've talked to other fascinating doctors and scientists around the world, so trying to take what they're saying, really, and put it into the public domain, because we want this information to be available for everyone. We don't want some esoteric group who've got all the knowledge, you know, this sort of holy priesthood who've got the knowledge and they condescend to give us some information. We want everyone to have the knowledge.
Oh, I see. Oh, how noble of you, John. You don't want this group of people with all these experts, with all this knowledge, just telling you what to think. That would be terrible. Instead, you come to my channel and I'll tell you what to think. Great. Thanks so much, John. I love the way it's like, you know, all these experts who are really clever and stuff, and the average person like you who's viewing, you're a bloody dumbass, right? You can't understand them, but they'll come on my channel, and I'm northern class, blue collar, red shirt, headphones, working guy who was just a nurse, and Tony Blair, instead of shoving him down a coal mine, shoved him into the old academics. So now I'm totally on your side. Doff me cap to everyone. Me down the old coal mines. Canaries, law for Hovis. Yes, please. That's me. I'll just tell you what to think, lad. All right? You don't want these academics thinking and telling you what to think. They'll tell me what to tell you, and I'll tell you what to think. And by gum, you can trust me, lad, because I'm the old working class guy from the north of England.
Everyone who takes an interest, be able to work things out for themselves and basically empower people to make their own decisions. So that's kind of what I'm doing now, and that's pretty well full-time at the moment, really.
Well, I imagine it is.
Wow, what a rebuttal. What a fascinating conversation this really is. What's your response to all of that? Well, I imagine it is. Great. What a debate.
I imagine it is. And the posters behind you say, follow the evidence wherever it leads.
Yeah.
And this is something that we want to get into with you, because before we get into the details of the questions about COVID and vaccines and lockdown and all of that,
let's just read out loud your personal propaganda. I know it's back there behind you at all times, just sort of constantly telling the audience, this is a person that follows the evidence wherever it leads. But, you know, this is trigonometry, and we don't just want to give people a free pass. And maybe we could actually just try and say those words out loud and really just sort of explain to our viewers how and why they're being brainwashed, in case that has more of a brainwashing effect. And that, I'm sure, would help you, John. Are you able to field this question for us, John? Or is this too hard of a question? Can you just read out loud your own propaganda? Is that too tough of a question? You don't have to answer, John, if you feel it's too much.
How a lot of people found themselves in a position during that whole last few years where they changed their mind about things as time evolved, as new things emerged, etc. We've just had the evil Piers Morgan on the show, who admitted that he'd made some mistakes, and everybody is going crazy about that.
So do you expect me to believe this isn't a 100% establishment operation and conversation? One of the establishment stooges says, we just had the evil Piers Morgan on who's changed his mind. And then Dr. Shill Campbell goes like, like the idea that Piers Morgan is actually evil is so laughable. Oh, Piers evil. Oh, that's hilarious. You two Triggernoms, you really are some of the greatest comedians in the world. The idea that Piers Morgan is against the people and is working with the establishment. This is such a genuine chit-chat. I'm really enjoying it.
What about you? How did your thinking evolve? What was your initial take when this new disease was emerging? We saw the scenes from Italy. Boris Johnson announces the first lockdown, 3 weeks to flatten the curve. And then quickly, we did find that maybe some of the things we were initially told weren't quite what we saw. How did your thinking evolve over that period?
How did your thinking evolve? What a beautiful turn of phrase. How did your thinking evolve? We quickly found out that some of the stuff we were told maybe wasn't quite right. How did your thinking evolve? Have you noticed that these guys wear earpieces? Like, I'm pretty sure that all the establishment narratives are just fed into their earpieces live. Like, is there a single genuine thing that anyone is allowed to say on this show? You know, why are they wearing such big earpieces? You know, I'm sure it's like with newspaper headlines. It's like, how did your thinking evolve? How did your thinking evolve? Just constantly repeating this sort of brainwashing that's supposed to go into the head of the average trigonometry viewer.
Initially, I mean, I first thought about making these videos in December 2019, and I actually made the first one, I think it was on the 26th of January 2020. So this was very near the start of the pandemic. Now, at that time, we did know about other coronavirus diseases. So, for example, there was what's called SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome. There was an outbreak of that in China and Taiwan and various areas in the Far East. 2002, 2003, and that did make people pretty sick. So that was a little bit frightening, but then that died out. The reason that died out is it wasn't very transmissible. It was nothing like as transmissible as the SARS coronavirus 2. And as well as that, the biggie with SARS coronavirus 2 was people become infectious before they become symptomatic.
To somebody with discernment, it's fairly obvious the role that John Campbell plays for the establishment, you know. He takes these sort of complex medical establishment narratives and says and summarizes them for people that the establishment think are stupid by saying things like, the biggie with coronavirus SARS-2 is you can get sick without a symptom. You know what I mean? The biggie. He says things like that. You know, he takes the establishment narratives and he boils them down for people that struggle to think for themselves. And he's been rubber stamped by the trigonometry boys. There's just this voice of this guy's doing incredibly well on YouTube, so he must be just putting out great content. That's the only reason why you could be doing well on YouTube. You must just be putting out such great content like the trigonometry boys. You must have such charisma like the trigonometry boys that you're just absolutely killing it on YouTube. There's nothing to worry about here. There's nothing alarming.
So with SARS coronavirus 1, people would get sick, and then they would be transmissible. So when people were sick, you knew if you isolated them, you were probably going to be okay. That's why it died out. And then there's another one called MERS, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. Now, we still get a few cases of this every year. I'm not quite sure how many, probably about 100 cases a year. Very often in Saudi Arabia, because it's a zoonotic spillover from camels.
Such incredibly great, fascinating conversations on this channel.
But the thing about the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, it's got a horrendously high fake case fatality rate. It's probably about 40% of people actually die from this disease. Quite horrendous. It's, you know, it's kind of up there with the Ebolas and the really nasty viruses. But again, this doesn't really spread much away from camel areas where people keep camels because, again, the transmissibility of the disease occurs when people are sick, so you know how to isolate them. And in fact, tragically, quite a few of the deaths from the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome have been in healthcare workers who've contracted it from quarantined patients. But high death rates, so the probability that there was a new coronavirus disease with a high death rate was not absurd, not by any means.
Right, so I guess everyone that was sort of pushing the coronavirus vaccine really hard was just doing absolutely the right thing with the information they had available to them at the time. Well, thanks very much, John. Thanks for kicking the establishment's ass all over the trigonometry studio. That's not easy to do. Thanks a lot. You put up with some tough questions.
And then we had people like the World Health Organization saying the death rate might be 1 or 2%. Well, you know, if you think about that, if you think about the United Kingdom and 1 or 2% of us die, then that's a pretty big chunk.
What an academic. I can see why this guy is doing the numbers on YouTube. 1% of people that live in the UK is a pretty big chunk. Yep. Totally legitimate traffic. I understand completely. He's not out there to just take establishment narratives and dumb them down for people and pretend to be on their side. No.
So there was a few frightening things, and we didn't really know. So at the beginning, the only information we had, apart from this background science that we could learn fairly quickly, was what official organizations like governments around the world were telling us.
Do you see the narrative that's forming here? In beginning, well, we didn't have any information, so we just did whatever government told us to do. You see what I mean? Or in the beginning, all anyone could do was be afraid and do what government said, lad. You know? I'm here to take on the establishment wherever truth leads me, wherever evidence goes. There goes old Dr. John Campbell. Right. Oh, yeah, but at the beginning, listen, no one really knew anything. All we could do was do what the government told us to do. That was the only sensible thing to do. Oh, yeah.
And then, of course, enter organizations like the BBC. Now, what the BBC do on their reports very often is they'll be talking about something in general. So I remember during the Andrew Wakefield years, he was the guy, the pediatrician, that said there's a link between MMR vaccine and autism, which of course we now know there isn't. But the BBC actually showed someone who had the MMR vaccine, and then they say this is little baby so and so, or little boy so and so. He had the MMR vaccine last week, and now he's got autism. Now, on a population scale, that will happen. So what they do is they home into individual cases, and that can give a completely distorted view of the nature of reality.
Whereas the reality is, right, John, that vaccines don't give you autism. And even if your kid has the MMR vaccine and then gets autism the next week, that doesn't mean anything. You should just listen to Dr. John Campbell instead. I love the way here's one example of it's like, oh, and I tell you what, you can't trust the BBC because the BBC that said that vaccines give you autism and they don't. Oh yeah, that's totally what we've got to look out for. We've totally got to look out for the BBC saying that vaccines are dangerous, because that's totally what's going on, and that's totally, the current thing that's happening is that the BBC are telling us that vaccines are dangerous when they're not. Thank you so much, John. And thank you for definitely saying that vaccines don't cause autism. It's so important to have you out here battling the establishment like this. Thank you so much. Listen, I'm going to have to do part 2 of this tomorrow, because there's just so much nonsense in this interview that I can't get through it in one session. It's a long interview. It's like an hour, and I'm trying to get to the bits where he talks about the vaccines and the deaths. But this video is important to set the scene for who the establishment wants you to believe that this guy is. He's the guy who's on your side, working class guy, academic, but basically one of you, and and now he's got this sort of reputation as this honest Dr. John. He's going to start telling you that vaccines don't cause autism, and then we're going to get on to COVID in the next video. Anyway, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, all the rest of it. Thanks to everyone who supports the channel. Link in description if you want to do that. And yeah, see you tomorrow for part 2.